So the last video, we went through everything on my bookshelves but one. And that's what I'm going to show you today. The genre we're getting into now is directly relevant to my new channel. And the single book that inspired me to do that, which I've loved for what I have to admit now is half a lifetime ago, literally half a lifetime ago. Which I've loved half my life. To be clear, this channel will not be going away. I just thought that some of you may appreciate my keeping this other stuff, the new channel, separate and its content. Perhaps it's best I tell you first about this book, and you'll see why I'm doing so. Well, here, we'll get to the book in just a second. I've spent this past summer on a collector's buying spree with these. Just as around 10 years ago, I did the same thing with tarot, having recognized that tarot decks were ever rarefying quickly. Many of the decks I was collecting have now indeed become extremely rare, and some of them even out of print. So a similar thing happened, and I think many of these will soon become at least twice as hard to find, or perhaps even impossible. It was in early June of this year that all of this hit me in terms of this particular genre. I mean, it's true of all books that are aging, but it hit me with this one when I started thinking a lot more about Solaris and how significant and important my personal discovery of that story was from the very first, and still is. So, for those of you who do not know, this book was first published in 1961, and perhaps I should get my glasses. I will be right back. Okay, yeah, this was first published 1961. I will be taking these on and off as I need them. Pretty much just for reading. I discovered this story in the late 90s when I saw a movie version of it, the original Russian 1972 version of Solaris, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. And immediately it was among my favorite movies, and I thought if not my favorite. Deliberately slow-paced, very quietly and subtly emotional, and it just put together so many things for me. For those of you who don't know, and I'll try to stop saying for those who don't know, because I could often in this video, the story is very... I won't go into too much depth about it. It is about... There's a space station floating around a distant planet, and there are a couple of scientists who've been living on that space station studying the planet. They get a distress call from one of them who asks that a certain psychologist show up for some help. And it's hard to know where to begin with this while still leaving some things mysterious to you all who are unfamiliar with it. But it's important that I tell you about it. I will not give anything away. Basically, the planet itself is alive and intelligent, and it's covered entirely by an ocean. This ocean is sort of like prima materia, the primal waters of life. Our hero, our protagonist, this psychologist, his name is Chris Kelvin. very almost immediately discovers there's some strange life forms walking around on this space station. Inexplicable stuff. And no one will give him straight answers when he asks questions. So this being, this planet, this intelligence, this alien is so alien that we don't know where to begin studying it. We don't know how, we don't know if we ever will, we don't know if we can. But it seems to not care at all. It seems utterly not really annoyed, but even perhaps unaware that it is being studied. It seems that way. And people find that frustrating. So this thing seems to understand the particular human intelligences that are there studying it, at the same time that it seems to not care about it. It is creating with this prima materia. It is looking into the thoughts and memories of all the people there. I say all the people, there's only a handful. And creating living beings based on what it sees in our thoughts and memories. So, in the case of our protagonist, he has an ex-wife who some time back had committed suicide. And in the course of the story, this thing reaches into his subconscious and it makes her alive again. But she knows she was just born and that her existence now is impossible. So she starts asking philosophical questions. So at the same time that she has new questions to ask, new ideas are brought about, as happens with philosophy. And this triggered so many things with me. Here you have a self-aware creature who feels attached to all the things that he remembers about her, and yet this person isn't really his ex-wife. It's his memories of her, but it is new life. So it is now, from this moment on, its own creature having its own experiences. Despite everything I've just said, I'm not really giving anything away. You need to dive into this book. Now, the significance I'm talking about is in terms of the book and the movie. And I saw that movie first. It was the 1972 version. That's important, the Russian 1972 version. And then I went out and found the book, and I love them equally. The book is very different from the story. In the movie, the book is very different from the movie. In that movie version, the first, I think, 30 to 45 minutes is completely added by the writer-director. There's a lot of stuff showing the importance of earth and earthly things and nature, above all else, nature. That was all added, and it's all good stuff. It works. It just works. But much like Stanley Kubrick, or Stephen King rather, was extremely unhappy with Stanley Kubrick's treatment of his book The Shining in the movie version of it. Same thing happened. This author hated the movie. So as I said, we start out on Earth. There's a lot of stuff going on there in his personal life. You see his attachment to natural things and his relationship with each of his parents. And he gets word he's been called into outer space. He's being prepped for that. Well, in the book, the story begins with none of that. It begins with him in the ship taking off for this planet, Solaris. I need to get this out of the way briefly, too. There was a remake of that movie in 2002 with George Clooney. Do not bother with it. Some people like it. But at the time, it was stated that that was an updated adaptation of the book. It is not. That's a lie. It is a remake of the first movie. Because all that stuff at the beginning with his dad, it was kept there. And all the dialogue that was changed for the movie from the book, not all of it, some of it is used. It is a remake of the movie, not an adaptation of the book, and it is not worth your time. That's my opinion. You need to find the book and find the original version of the movie. So, I may be coming back to that here and there. Let me... there's a reason I'm telling you about this and showing you, too, the versions. I found two what are now quickly becoming collector's items. Is this the original? No. Okay. So it was written by the author Stanislaw Lem, Polish author, known largely for his satire. This is not at all. Look at this awesome psychedelic cover art. So this is a 1973 reprint. This is the one I've had for longer. This is 1970 reprint. Hoping these covers show clearly enough. I love the artwork on both of these. So, obviously, Solaris falls into the genre of science fiction. And that's the shelf we're looking at here. I've got some more stuff scattered over here, but mainly it's this one. That's the shelf we're looking at. I had long thought of science fiction throughout my time of not reading much of it, as many probably do, as being all about robots and ray guns and spaceships. Now, I found these three things. That's big. One of the reasons for that is having seen so much of it with what they call the big three. Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert Heinlein, all of whom I had a chance to discover and dive into a bit in my teens. In fact, Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land, is one of the two authors I discovered in my teens that made me enjoy fantasy and science fiction, although a lot of people get mad at me for calling this guy fantasy, but sometimes I mix them up in speech because science fiction is a form of fantasy, like horror. One of the authors that turned me onto it was Robert Heinlein, and I loved, as a teen, Stranger in a Strange Land. But I had the same frustration with it as I do now on rereading it. Here's another edition. I think this came out in the same year. Was this originally published in 1961? I had it in my thoughts for a very long time that it was 1968. No, this was also 1961. So, we won't go into the plot of that one. I'd probably be talking about it quite a while, and I don't intend to. I wouldn't want to. It's good. It's fun. Doesn't hold up for me as much. I'm sure that's true of a lot of people. There are things about it I still love. And as a matter of fact, the first half of that book is incredible. What's so weird to me is exactly, and I counted the pages from the beginning to the end of the actual text part of the book, discounting contents and all the rest, exactly halfway through the book, it changes tone. There's no gradual transitioning. It's as if somebody else wrote it. in the second half, and I just did not appreciate it really at all. There were some moments here and there, but the larger context, it lost me at the last page of the first half. That part is very exciting and fun and adventurous, and I'll let that book go for now. Where are you? Let me put Solaris back. I have some other books of his, but we won't talk about those. It's enough to know that I have a few more, and that's the important one. Now, we don't need to look at specific books by Isaac. Well, maybe we do. I'm here. That's the point of the video. I was mentioning the big three, so Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and Arthur C. Clarke. Basically the same kind of thing as far as... I had some fun with it then. It doesn't really hold up for me now. But we're going to get into why. How there's a specific era in the evolution of science fiction literature that I am focused on now, that I can't get enough of. I'm near obsessive about. So Isaac Asimov, he's hard science. I don't care for his prose style. There are things about him I enjoy, but all in all, I'm not excited to read another one. As far as storytelling, I think his best book is one of the... Well, it's not Foundation, I'll say that. And it has some juicy cover art, too. The Gods Themselves. Maybe I didn't sit at a very good angle for putting these books back, huh? Taking them down is no issue. I wanted to be close so you could see everything and let your eyes scan without me having to pull them out individually, though. The other one, Arthur C. Clarke. 2001, A Space Odyssey. The book, it's just as good as the movie. It's a different experience, but it's just as good. It's incredible. And I agree with many, if not most, that his best novel is called Childhood's End. And it does something that a lot of science fiction books and movies do very well, very differently. They call it the big dumb object. In a lot of these stories, there's something big we come to and we don't understand it, and we're trying to understand it, and it has some mysterious power, or maybe we just think it does. Think back to early 90s, the movie, oh my God, maybe it's a good thing that I've forgotten the title, Independence Day. So big mothership arrives. Unbelievably massive. And at first people don't know what's going on, and then the movie goes downhill plot-wise. So I'm convinced they took that idea, just that part of it, from Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. A giant spaceship arrives, and a massive fleet of them arrive. And they stay there, and nothing happens. And what is it, like 10 years goes by or something. Nothing happens. And that's part of their plan, is they get people normalized to it. I won't go beyond that, but it's an incredible story. And it really stands out because I otherwise just have a feeling about Arthur C. Clarke. There's a reason I'm going into those three, and because in the way that I am, according to my tastes, because We're not going to get into them any further, and that might be expected for people who come here to see the science fiction stuff I'm talking about. Know why they're not going to get any more of those three. At least, not that I know of, not that I think. So those three authors, I find I'm simply no longer interested in their styles or their intentions in what they're doing with their stories. Such as with the spirit of Solaris, I wanted more than what you usually get or what you expect to get. That's what, to be fair, I should say that, what I expected from science fiction, looking at all of it. I wanted more, knowing there were other sciences that didn't necessarily need to be set in the future. Science is here. There's boundless material to be used. Although set in the future is fine. That's fine. It's just there's so much else to do with it besides kill the giant robot, Again, that's to do with my assumptions about it having gone so long without reading any of it. Well, that right there is the beauty of the science fiction new wave that came around in the mid-1960s. Stories published at that time began to be just as much about philosophy and psychology, sociology and anthropology. Many of these authors were like the pop and rock British invasion of the same time. British. So I've been catching up and in a kind of reading and buying frenzy with these. This era between the early to mid-60s and what's often stated to be the late 70s, but I would argue stretches a bit further into the early 80s, is my favorite stuff in science fiction. It is also this time frame that I put a focus on it for my new channel, where you will find readings of this stuff. How's that for a long-winded way of making that point of what the other channel is about? Short stories as well as novels, and there will be. I read some of the editorials and reviews from the early magazines. It's pre-90s. I think I say that as sort of a subheading on the channel. So the channel is called Quasar Spectra. Subheading is pre-90s science fiction and speculative fiction readings. So I'm in the middle of recording one right now, a novel. I have only one other novel so far, which I had to put to be fair to all potential audience members, I had to put a adult-only stamp on that one. But the one I'm reading right now is something, good timing with my making this video for you all, is something that I think will appeal to viewers of this channel just as much as those of the new channel. I won't say what it is yet, just, So I will put a link in this video's description for anyone who may be interested. And for the purposes of this one, let me show you what's on the shelf and what kind of thing you can expect over on that channel. Now, I was never a science fiction junkie. I went in and out of it in my teens, and I read a couple here and there throughout my life in the intervening time, along with Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. My discovery of science fiction, along with him, is also due to discovering Piers Anthony, this book, On a Pale Horse. This is book one of the Incarnations of Immortality series, and this blew me away. This was a perfect thing to discover as a teen. And I turned all my friends onto it. I sort of started a thing that made me really happy. Now, it's I have to laugh because I still enjoy reading Piers Anthony. It's not hard science. That's a distinction. Let me use the phrase again for those who don't know. Between hard science and soft science. He is not hard science. He's as much as there must be in order to get you to understand the world building. He is a perfect mix of science fiction and fantasy. In that one, basically, a guy's about to commit suicide. Death comes to him personified, the Grim Reaper, you know. And at the last second, the guy says, "Oh, hell with it." And he kills death instead of himself. So now he takes on the responsibilities. He becomes death. He becomes the personification. He becomes the incarnation of immortal death. As much of a contradiction in terms as that has become. So the book 1 deals with death. Book 2 deals with time. Book 3 deals with fate. There are 3 sisters of the fates. And then war, and then nature, and then there's a couple other books. And kind of like the original Planets of the Apes movies in the 60s and 70s, the quality, you can feel and see the quality diminishing with each successive book. And to be fair, I've not read the most recent one. But by the time we got to Good and Evil, I thought, I don't know. He is so prolific, though. This Piers Anthony is as prolific as Frank Zappa was with music, or Tangerine Dream. That's all I have in my notes. Let me show you some of these things and what I have. Here's the thing. I mentioned earlier about how the New Wave put a focus on a certain type of science dealt with in science fiction. New types of science not used before in fiction. Sorry, I've got a fly orbiting my head here. That's what I want more of, the weird 70s-ness and 60s too. But as a collector, not just a reader, I miss the days of these garish, weird covers. I showed you the cover of Solaris, but you know, these days, go to a bookstore. Does it even matter a genre? Pick out a book at random. More often than not, it's just a solid color or a photograph of a nature scene. Or a photograph of a person who's, I guess we're supposed to imagine that's the character, but it was just somebody who modeled for a photo. I look at this, I think, what happened to the art? So, as a collector, that's what makes this new wave era extra special to me, is you had that. So we're talking roughly between early 60s and early 1980s, so some people want to cap it at specifically the year 1977. I say, nah, give it a couple more years to die the slow death. Let's look at some examples of what I'm talking about here. Oh, that Isaac Asimov book, The Gods Themselves, was a good example, too. Let's go to an author. See these behind me? This whole shelf right here, this is all New Wave science fiction and Golden Age. I don't want to say it's just New Wave. It's pre-90s. So up through the early 80s, there's a couple of newer titles, just a couple. All this down there. An author I found a bit, shocking is not a bad word to use, is, and I'm going to change the angle now so I'm not looking behind me. We find the right book that I've read first. collection of short stories by Barry N. Malzberg. Look at that cover art. So this was early 70s. Collection of short stories called Out from Ganymede. And he says right in his introduction that he prefers the short story. He has a pretty significant collection of novels, though, but even they are short for what his novels tend to be anywhere between 120 and 200 pages. That's yet another good thing about this era in science fiction. There was no pressure from publishers to make a 500-page book for something that could have been done in as many pages as he did it, or to make everything into a series. Just tell the story and be done with it and get on to the next thing. There are some themes Barry Malzberg deals with that his readers and he himself has noted. It's as if he's doing the same thing a new way each time. And it could be argued not entirely in a new way. And yet, with each book, with each story, I love it. I'm going to come right out and say it. Barry Malzberg is a genius. There's always a scene, either a scene or an ongoing theme involving unpleasurable sex. And he'll talk about it in detail, and he makes it an unpleasant experience. But that is tempered with his extremely dry and often black humor, always present in his work. So that's the first one I've read. There is a novel that he wrote called, drum roll here, Beyond Apollo. Very cynical look at the death of the space program in the early 70s. This plays on that as if there had been another manned mission, this time to Venus. And it begins with an astronaut returning from a manned mission to Venus. There had been 2 astronauts set off on this journey. Only one of them returns. And this book is about the returning one changing his story when pried for an explanation what happened to the other guy. Sometimes he says, I killed him. Other times he says, aliens took him. Other times the story changes, and we're not quite sure what happens. We're not quite sure if he's not quite sure what happens, or if he's just BSing. I'm telling you, Barry Malzberg is a genius. He is one of 3 authors. I'm sure I'll think of more probably after I'm done making this video, but he's one of 3 that I want to tell you are so underrated and underappreciated. You will find this novel read by me on the new channel. Can we see? Yeah, so all these books over here up to this point are all Barry Malzberg. Now, should I bring this closer so you can see titles yourself? Maybe that's what I should do. There is, I should pull out one of these that I used the cover art for the avatar for the new channel. Where are you, brother? I hope you all can read this for all these in-between moments where I'm looking for a book. You can just let your eyes scan. There it is. Haravet's World. Maybe I'll read Maybe I'll read this one too at some point. So this part, not including the title, I use as an avatar for the channel. So this is more, it is a fictional story. It's barely science fiction though. And this is something he's done multiple times too. It's semi-autobiographical. It's more about the world of science fiction publishing and fandom than it is a science fiction novel itself. Brilliant. Can I say it enough? Genius. Sometimes uncomfortable and depressing, but that's part of it. So enough about Barry. One of the other three highly underrated, really deserving of modern attention and readership. Let me show you the book that I discovered him with. An Irish writer. Can we see that well enough? I'm going to assume you can from this angle I am over here. 1 Million Tomorrows by Bob Shaw. He's been around since the 60s, but he really took off and got popular in the 70s, from the mid-70s on. And I don't think that lasted. I could be wrong about that, but I think his best-known work is from the late 70s, and it seems to me that he was popular enough in his day, but there's nothing available. You can find his books easily enough. I want, of course, all these original editions, but I don't see many people talking about him these days. And I don't think there's anything there's any available audiobooks. So, of course, you know where I'm going with that. I seek to change that. I have read one short story of his, and I intend to read a novel. I'm talking about aloud for you all. This is a good place to start, I would say, for him, if you want to just get an idea of the flavor of what he does, because this is short stories, and then move on to the novels. Am I talking as if, does my excitement show for this genre / subgenre of new wave? I'm just now kind of hearing it come out of myself. So Bob Shaw, you know what? I was wrong. That is a book of his short stories, but the one that I read that has the short story that I read aloud on my channel is this one. That is Tomorrow Lies in Ambush, Bob Shaw. Very creative, inventive stories. Yes, there's future stuff. Yes, there's robots and ray guns and spaceships. Sometimes. But unpredictable stuff. The whole point of science fiction is to open you to new vistas, get your mind, the machines in there oiled up and going a little bit faster and taking an adventure into a new place. Bob Shaw. May as well go for all three of the names I want to talk about back to back. Now, some people are going to disagree with me about this third name being underrated or underappreciated. I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to explain why. C.L. Moore. Best known as one half of the writing team with Henry Kuttner in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. They're an incredible writing team. Henry Kuttner is well known in his own right. Perhaps much more so than C.L. Moore as far as his solo work. Back in the days of the pulp magazines, which was often your only chance to read science fiction stories, and even then they would come and go, and if you missed it, you missed it, and that was it. But the two of them published in those magazines, and Henry Kuttner sent what is essentially a fan letter to C.L. Moore saying, look, I love this stuff. You're an incredible writer. I love this stuff. I just want you to know I'm going to be pushing your name to everyone I meet who shares our love of this stuff. They agreed to meet in person, and Henry Kuttner found that C.L. Moore was a woman. And they soon married, and they began writing together. And I think they're best known. I heard it argued that their best work was done together. I don't know if it was their best. My cats are getting into a tiff. One will not leave the other alone. He insists she play with him. Anyways, I'm saying C.L. Moore, underappreciated, relatively speaking, for her solo work. This is a good one to start with her because it's a collection of short stories. And as you can see, it's titled The Best Of. This is classic science fiction library, science fiction book club selection. There are a lot of authors who they have put out a best of collection, and I don't always agree with best of choices in terms of music too. But these are very, very good and imaginative, and what else do you want? Hey? So, C.L. Moore. Yeah, I've got a collection. We have the same book club. Has best of Henry Kuttner. We're apparently hanging around, and I didn't organize these by New Wave separated from Golden Age or anything like that, but I'm showing you what I have while I'm looking at it beside each other. This is a very funny book. The Space Merchants. Frederick Pohl, written with C.M. Kornbluth. Another pair of people who are well known in their own right for their own solo work. This is a very amusing book, The Space Merchants. Not all that far off from what's going on right now, like with YouTube, me being on here and kind of corporate takeover of stuff, and YouTube is quickly becoming just another, right alongside Fox and CNN. I won't tell you anything about it other than it takes what is a very scary idea, things that are very real, and will just rub your face in the amusement of it, where humor can be found, and thank God it can be found and is. All right, so let's leave that shelf alone for now. All that's really over here are the Frank Herbert. These are the 80s versions of all the Dune sequels. And yeah, I'm going to show off I've got some original Dunes here. I am missing only one original 1965 edition of Dune. I have all these 80s. If you were around in the 80s, you remember these book covers. I saw them every time I walked through the bookstore, and I never read Dune until about 10 years ago, along with some other Frank Herbert stories. But I was always intrigued by that cover. See, that's the thing about this cover art. You should be intrigued. You should be able to somewhat, at least, judge a book by its cover. Yes, I said it. this is one of the 60s covers for that. Let me see what year. Some people care, as I do. Got the glasses again. That is 1965, which is the year this was first published. Philippe, get out of here. Get out of here, bruh. Leave her alone. Now this one, I think might be 65 also. Just checking the date. I'm going to show you. 1965. There is a third copy with yet another cover from that year of original publication that I have yet to acquire. As you can imagine, it's quite a bit more. So, I've read the book twice now, the original. I will again one day, and at that point I'd like to go straight through and ignore the continuation of the sequels beyond the fourth or fifth book, especially when the Frank Herbert ceased to write any of them after his death. His son, along with another writer, continued, and I'm just not interested. I'll leave it at that. All right, let's come off of that shelf and stick right back. So, I'm assuming that a lot of my viewers are not going to be familiar with this stuff, and I realize some of the things I'm saying is going to be just, people are into this, into science fiction, have heard it 100 times, and they're well aware of it, but I don't know how many of you are in that crowd or not. So I'm just going to say who cares and just talk about it. Here's another incredible cover, and look at that title too. Harlan Ellison. Just the flavor of that title. The beast that shouted love at the heart of the world. Is my microphone too far away? Yes, it is. How long has my microphone been that far away? The beast that shouted love at the heart of the world. Nova, get out of here. See? Now this is 1968. Collection of short stories. Harlan Ellison was known just as much for his being an editor and for being a pain in the ass to deal with. Very funny guy, too, though. At the same time that he's kind of an ass, he's, I mean that in a loving way. I really, very funny guy. Cynical, funny. Look up videos by Harlan Ellison, just the interviews and just the ones where he's talking. He started a YouTube channel for, I think, sometime in the year before he died, and his son or a family friend or somebody just filmed him just talking. And over that period, he uploaded a lot of video introductions that he made in the 90s for the Sci-Fi Channel, where it's just him talking. He's not necessarily specifically introducing a particular movie or documentary or anything. He's just Harlan Ellison just talking about whatever comes to mind. And it's fun to just listen to the guy talk. He has what has always been and still is a highly praised collection of short stories that, in the spirit of this new wave that I keep bringing up, that was one of the big driving forces of that. Let me show it to you. Is this the first one? Dangerous Visions. So he edited this and chose different authors to be included in it. And since there are several of these and several editions, I don't remember what specific authors are in here, and I would just say look into both of these. Now, it can seem confusing because if you look into it, you'll see that it's been discussed. There's Dangerous Visions, and then there's Dangerous Visions again. So the second volume. And people are still waiting for Dangerous Visions Volume 3, which has yet to come. Somebody recently said it actually is on the way now, but hey, I'll believe it when I see it. It's been decades. It can seem confusing because you have what is titled Dangerous Visions and Dangerous Visions again. And then in other editions, you have what is called Dangerous Visions 2 and 3. So I have yet to figure out. I mean, it's just a matter of looking at the stories within it, and I don't know if it's a different publisher or if in a republishing they just divided the stories up, the collections, in a different way or not. But there are two collections of stories from Harlan Ellison's editing that you must have if you're interested in this stuff. If you're not, have I sold you in any way to this particular, I guess you could call it a subgenre. Let me put Harlan back. Sometimes, look, Harlan is incredibly creative author. Sometimes you're just not in the mood. I shouldn't say you. I don't know who you are or how you feel about it. I'm just not in the mood for it. And there are certain stories I even smile to myself thinking, I'll come back to that one day. Maybe it's a mood thing, but I did not like that. While others I loved. And isn't that kind of the way it goes with most works of genius? Absolute love or hate. That's thing about Pink Floyd. I've been like a friend to me throughout life. Love everything except maybe 2 songs. Only 2 songs of theirs feel kind of tepid. And one of them's after they went on without Roger, of course. What else should I show you? A little bit of everything, huh? So, if you're new to this and you want to travel back in time, I don't mean in terms of a story. I mean, if my point in this video is affecting you anyway and I'm intriguing you, you should also try the author Thomas Disch. Again, I mean, like with some of the others I mentioned, it can be really a hard experience to read. But he's so, like watching a great movie, it'll be over before you know, and you think, where did that time go? That's how engaged I was. Absolutely incredible prose. I won't tell you anything about the stories. Here and there, I'll tell you a little about some of these stories, but for the most part, no. I told you what to expect for my chosen portion of science fiction, and that you already know that's what we're talking about. So here's an interesting author, and if the story I'm about to tell you intrigues you, this might be a good place to start. 10,000 Light Years from Home, from the author James Tiptree Jr. Now, James had been publishing in magazines. Well, I don't even know from when. Probably through the 60s, certainly through the 70s, under that name, James Tiptree Jr. Robert Silverberg was an editor for a lot of these short story collections, and we'll come back to his work in a bit, perhaps in just a moment. But he edited one collection in which James Tiptree Jr.'s stories appeared. Well, no. I'm talking about several times. I think several of James's stories appeared in collections edited by Robert Silverberg that eventually, when he wrote a blurb about James's stories, he said something to the effect of, the subject came up of, a lot of science fiction writers can't write female characters very well. Be that as it may, the question arose whether or not James Tiptree even was a man, because he wrote women so well in the short stories and novels. Women and men, despite the, outlandish, it's science fiction, for crying out loud. The male and female characters are written so believably. And the idea came up, is James Tiptree Jr. even a man at all? And Robert Silverberg said, in effect, of course. Of course he is. There's no way that nobody knows how to write men like men. The particular characters in these stories, there's just no other way around it. Well, 1977, was it her mother died? Something happened in 1977. The gig was up. The secret came out. James Tiptree Jr. was a woman. Also, a World War II hero, and had become a CIA spy. Loads of fun. Ultra creative. I read one story on my channel. You're going to hear me say that a couple times. Unless I already... No, I've only mentioned a couple of them. I have read one very short story by James Tiptree Jr. And you know what? Because that is the working name, that is the one I remember. I don't even recall what her real name is. I wish they would have put it on the books, since now we know, and I am embarrassed not to have that firsthand in my memory, along with the writing name. So, James Tiptree Jr. I would have put this with the other three I mentioned, with underappreciated, unknown, but James Tiptree is known. You should discover her work. I don't think she ever wrote under her real name. I think it was all with this one. And I don't think we need to go through George Orwell, 1984. So the books that belong together over here, for obvious reasons. That you already know the theme, the running theme of why I'm keeping these books together. Now, one book people seem to have only really relatively recently begun talking about, along the theme of those last two I just showed you, 1984 and Brave New World, is... Let me pull it out and show it to you, because I keep it in my Russian section over here. You know what? I can't pull it out because it's in a very precarious position. I've got some things that are going to fall over if I pull that book out. I would need to put a hand up there and hold it in place. Anyways, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin came out it was written in the 1920s in the Soviet Union. Story had to be smuggled out. Of course, at the time, you couldn't publish a novel that shows the evil system of Soviet communism for what it is. You don't really want to be tortured and killed. So it was smuggled out on separate... There's an intense story that probably has its own novel's worth of a storytelling as to how the story was smuggled out of the Soviet Union. Wasn't published until... was it the 1980s? a ridiculously long amount of time. That much I know. And wasn't even published in Russia until relatively recently, till after it was here. Very, very good book. You should give that one a shot too. And one more on that note, and we'll leave that subject matter alone. Now, this is a kind of a recent reprinting. German authoress, I rarely get to use that word, Kalokane. Let me just read you the blurb on the back. A pioneering work, I was wrong, not German, Swedish. A pioneering work of dystopian fiction from one of Sweden's most acclaimed writers. This was written during World War II, though, I believe. Apparently that's going to go on. Written midway between Brave New World and 1984, as the terrible events of the Second World War were unfolding, Kalokane depicts a totalitarian world state which seeks to crush the individual entirely. In this desolate, paranoid landscape of police eyes and police ears, the obedient citizen and middle-ranking scientist Leo Kahl discovers a drug that will force anyone who takes it to tell the truth. But can private thought really be obliterated? Karin Boy's chilling novel of creeping alienation shows the dangers of acquiescence and the power of resistance, no matter how futile. So, that's Kalokane by Karin Boy. So, what other author do I want to mention? Here you go. And I'm going to start all these. I'm going to keep up the theme of pulling out the book that I first read of theirs. So, Harry Harrison. He goes back to the Golden Age. We're talking, 80 years ago. I think he got started. Maybe he was there from the beginning. I don't really know. This is a collection of his short stories. 2 Tales and 8 Tomorrows. We're keeping up with that gloriously 60s artwork. Look at that. This is a collector's dream. This fast-paced, fun, adventurous. That seems to be, if he does anything outside of that, I have yet to discover it. That seems to be his thing that you always run across. So this is a collection of short stories, as you can see, very thin book. Actually, I don't think I've read any of his novels yet. He's one. If I wanted to try to get somebody into this, he would be one of the authors I would recommend. Say, go grab a short story or two. I could say that about anybody I'm picking out here, but I also know that some of them will not appeal to everybody. Some of them will have a more is it right to say alienated audience? Divided, nonetheless. Harry Harrison, 2 Tales and 8 Tomorrows. And at this point, I would say it's probably safe to just grab anything from him. Like, no matter what time period you're talking about, too. Just look at some other covers from his stuff here. Jeez, look at that. I miss these kinds of covers. Covers are just so boring. What happened to cover art with these books? Like the science fiction new wave itself, as it gradually died away into the 80s, by the time the mid-80s are here, it's just gone. That era, that era was gone. I was thinking about this earlier. I liken it to the same way you drive by like a McDonald's now or a Wendy's. What is it? It's like they tried to make it even more boring. They try to make these places look as appealing as their food. There used to be color in these places, and now they're all painted gray with white. Anyways, it's the same kind of thing. Book cover art got really boring and dull. Samuel R. Delany, Nova. So I just finished this, and I did really enjoy it. Had some issues with it, but some people call him genius too. He's incredibly creative with language. Although I realize he's being creative with language use, I still have issues with his grammar in the casualness with which he... do you want me to understand what's happening or not? There are some areas I didn't think that needed to be done. I can't go any further without telling you more than you should know about the story if you haven't read it yet. I understand Amazon Prime has picked this up for to do a mini-series out of this. I've heard it called unfilmable, but I don't agree with that. I think you can do it, and it'll be fun. It'll just be absolutely wacko. So there's some of his books that I refuse to read. One of them I heard too much about it and about the sexual content, and that reminds me of one of the reasons why I stopped reading Robert Heinlein. I hear it pronounced both Heinlein and Heinlein. There's this... the particular way, lecherous is the word, for either the main character or a secondary character in, it seems, half the books that Robert Heinlein has written. And I can't figure out why that's the case and why we want to hear about the way he's thinking about women. That you look at the rest of the story, what's happening, so what does that have to do with anything? And of course, it's just because it's just something to do with the author himself, and it's uncomfortable in a way that's not necessary to the story, really hardly ever. And so I would recommend this one for Samuel Delany. And what did I do with his other books? These two, both of these. I do see that light reflecting on screen, so I'm trying to show them in a way that avoids that. All right, you see those beautiful covers, Ultra 60s, 70s, and the titles. I will leave it at that. So Alfred Bester. Now, I'm ashamed to admit I have not yet read this one. I understand this is one of the ones for newcomers that you must read, that this is something that will appeal to everyone. The Star is My Destination. Now, I know Alfred Bester from, I've read some short stories. I've read not read this. He's one of the old school guys from the Golden Age who, when the new wave came in the 60s, he took right to it and just rode that wave and very naturally went with it. So his style changed somewhat, sometimes drastically, sometimes, but very naturally. It wasn't like, is this what everybody's doing now? Well, I can do that too. I only have 2 books of his, or I'd show you more. A.E. Van Vogt, More Than Superhuman. He also does novels and short stories. Jack Vance. So which one should I show? Here, I'll show you the one. Excuse me, I had a pain in my stomach for a moment. This is the one I first read. Collection of short stories. Jack Vance, Phantasms and Magics. So, honestly, I can't remember. I intend to read him for the new channel. I can't remember if I already have done one or not. I have actually heard somebody say, and let me say ahead of time that I do not agree with this whatsoever, that Jack Vance is the Shakespeare of science fiction. I think that's so far out of the realm of what's true that, well, nothing more needs to be said about that. I see why they said it, though. Jack Vance is a poet. I mean, whether he thinks of himself that way or not, I don't know, but I'm calling him a poet. He writes poetically, and it's as if he cannot stop. That's a good thing. So he presents us with worlds that are so alien, and he gives it to us very poetically. There is, as weird as the stories get, there is always a romantic heart behind it. And that's what I appreciate about him. The story that, yes, I'll say it touched me most was... Is that the one? I can't remember. I remember the story, but I don't remember the title. Well, it's in here. It's about someone on a beach who makes contact with an alien presence. I'll say that. So, of course, there also exists a best of Jack Vance collection. Look at that 80s cover. Or is that 70s? Christopher Priest. I believe this was his first novel. Any of you who remember the movie from around 1990 with John Hurt and Bridget Fonda called Frankenstein Unbound, he was the author of the story. He also authored The Prestige, if you've seen that movie, with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale. I won't tell you anything about this one, but that Christopher Priest, he's still alive and kicking, and full of spunk, full of attitude, and it's great to see. He is certainly a British author, certainly part of the new wave. In fact, I think he claims to be the one who coined the term new wave, using it in the context that we're talking about here, having borrowed it from, the French New Wave that was just a little behind in time, or a little ahead of them in time, using it for the new context. So I mentioned that I would argue that the New Wave took a bit longer to die out, went into the 80s. Well, here we're talking about 1984 and 85. Suzette Haydn Elgin, Native Tongue, and its sequel, The Judas Rose. How about more 80s covers, huh? So, if you're a fan of language and inventive language, you're going to want to give her a shot. She created a language for those books. In fact, there's a third book to those that is extremely hard to find. I could find its availability, but for a lot of money. and I just can't get to that yet. So, ultra weird 70s stuff that just would not happen today. It's one of the reasons I miss all things 70s: music, movies, books, clothes, oh, you name it. D.G. Compton, another author not talked about much these days. You like that cover? I do. This is about creating simulated experiences that were recorded from people who actually had them and giving them to others for a price, of course, and all the confusing situations that would come about conceivably when any of that goes wrong, and it does. But very, very interesting, very 70s writer. That's not to say all of his stuff is dated and doesn't hold up. Some things about it do, some don't. That's the case with most art. Perhaps his most popular book is this one, let's try that again. Synthojoy. As a matter of fact, the story I just described to you was this one. I don't know why I thought of that, while holding Chronocules. That's a completely different story. So, I mentioned Robert Silverberg. This guy was on a roll. So he was there, through the 50s, but when the new wave came around, he was on a roll. Everything he did was incredible. There was not a dull moment. And I agree with people who point this out, specifically between the years 1966 and 1977. Everything is platinum. That's within that period. You cannot go wrong. And so that's why I have a shelf almost full of Robert Silverberg. All this up to here is Robert Silverberg. All this. This is kind of a cool thing that you don't see much anymore, or maybe you do and I'm just unaware of it. There's a term for this too. So here's a very short novel, or I guess more appropriately call it a novella, Born with the Dead by Robert Silverberg. Check this out. The other side is another novella by another author who, British author, not Robert Silverberg, Brian W. Aldiss was a British author, came through in with the new wave. Very creative. Sometimes he's as much horror as he is science fiction. Look at that cover, huh? The Saliva Tree. I'll just let you wonder. But Robert Silverberg, yeah, I mentioned him earlier. You need to check him out because he goes beyond science fiction. It's what I love. One thing I found is common in this new wave of science fiction is that there are lots of stories about in-between moments, transitional moments. Somebody's on their way somewhere, and an alien is on their way somewhere, and maybe there's a conversation that's had between the two of them where the worlds they're from are alluded to. We're never quite there. We're stuck in the equivalent of a train, let's say, for the duration of the story. And the fact that we're dealing with that one conversation, we're reading a story. We're not really watching a movie, So the only limits are whatever's there in your imagination. We can go anywhere. So we're in conversation in a fictional story. I just love that. And we have lots of that in the new wave. And Robert Silverberg, that is specifically what the short story's about that I read on my channel. And my God, do we need to talk about? Maybe we do. I'll show you some other books of his. I don't even know where to start because, like I said, find anything published between 66, 60, and 77, you cannot go wrong. And then, whether short story or novel. And then go from there. You can make up your mind if you want to go back in time or forward from there because he's still writing. There's a lot of historical fiction. Some of it is as much horror and historical fiction as it is science fiction. This is considered his masterpiece. I think mid-70s. Dying Inside. It's about a man getting old who has always been psychic and now he is losing his powers. I will leave it at that. This is probably the shallowest thing I have to say about any of these authors or titles, but Silverberg is not a very good titler. I could think of so many creative words and phrases to use for his stories, and it almost pisses me off that he's not used them. He needs better titles. Sometimes. It doesn't always go. I keep talking about all these covers. Let me just show some of them to you. Nightwings. Book of Skulls. Very, very unusual story. Okay, so that novel or novella I showed you that has the flip over with another author. The other one was Brian W. Aldiss. Very well known new wave writer. I think he passed away sometime in the last 10 years. This is perhaps his best book, certainly among his most popular in England. Not the best cover, though. It's extremely 80s. Nonstop. This had an alternate title. It was known by one title in the UK and one here in America. I don't even know if this was... We'll find out now. Anyways, the other title, the alternate title, had the word greenhouse in it, I believe. And this is regarded as his masterpiece by many. Huh. Am I thinking of another book then? Because this says previously published in the United States as Starship, but it was originally published in the UK. I'm trying not to spend too much time on each of these, but Brian W. Aldiss is the author to seek. Collection of short stories that I started with. Where is that? Galaxies like grains of sand. Perhaps that was it. Yeah, there are a lot of weird horror elements in his stories that I really dig. And I'm surprised with myself that I'm not always in the mood for horror as I used to be. I loved it and couldn't get enough of it as a teen and in my 20s. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe that remains true. I'm just not always in the mood for it. But when I am, I won't want anything else for however long, a week. Of course, I say that now. Watch, it'll happen again, and I'll be in nothing but that for a year. So, Brian, he's hit or miss for me. Some things I love, some things I've never found anything bad though. So you have that. Of course, that's true for a lot of these people in this particular era. What authors What other authors do I want to introduce you to? I told you about Piers Anthony, where I got started. There's some others. I have... here's one of the... We haven't talked about the 1950s specifically yet. I've gone way back, and then shortly after. But the 1950s, this was really popular. I think it still kind of is. The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. Look at that. I love that. I love that cover. Paul Anderson. So we were talking about a characteristic of New Wave being psychology, philosophy, anthropology, sociology, entering into science fiction. So it could be, even science fiction can be present day. I mean, present day. Well, present day now, but present day when the 60s and 70s were here. As was the case with, another drum roll, author John Brunner, Stand on Zanzibar. He's a very different science fiction author. He deals with a lot of those subjects I just told you about. There are things to love and that I'm annoyed with about him, but I'm fine with that, because what's important with this subject, that you're intellectually challenged. You're going to get that nonstop with him. So that's what's to appreciate. I maybe that's my point of my problem with him, is sometimes the story itself feels to suffer a bit so that we can find out about the science itself, which, see, it sounds like something that I shouldn't be complaining about, but everything is to serve the story, not the other way around. You'll know what I mean if you read John Brunner. In fact, it's something I've encountered with everything I've read so far. This was the most recent thing I read by him, which I found frustrating and fascinating, because, so often I thought, why are you doing this to me? Why are you telling me this? Why am I still reading about this? And yet I couldn't put it down. And that alone is a secondary, greater frustration. John Brunner, shockwave writer. Very, very 70s. So a lot of these stories, whenever you hear reference to tape or tape recording or something was taped, don't let your eyes roll and think, oh, that's such outdated technology. Well, look, how do we know right this moment that everything we use and see isn't going to be rendered obsolete in the next 10 to 20, 30 years? You don't. So just go with it. I mean, mentally replace tape with whatever technology you wish. I mean, cassettes came around. We thought that was going to be the next big thing. Cassettes came out. Next thing we know, they're being replaced almost as soon as they came around by CDs. And then the same happened to CDs. My point is made. I still recommend John Brunner, though. I have only read the 2 books and several short stories. And whatever my frustrations with some of his work or parts of his work, I still very much appreciate him. And I should probably even say I appreciate his frustrating me, because that's to be expected to some degree when you are challenged. Now, here's one I've not read yet. But with this genre, I've had this book the longest. I found it by chance in a thrift store. Rena Vale, Taurus 4. Maybe I'll just go in blind and read it for you online, and we'll all find out together what's going on with this. But how 70s is that? There's an almost amusing mystery around this book to me. So I can't go through this without mentioning Jose Philip Farmer. Which book should I show you first? Maybe the one I've had the longest. Where is it? I think found that same day in the same thrift store. Night of Light, and I've heard this talked about as among his best. I'm not sure, I don't remember it very well. But I know, like Piers Anthony, he's as much fantasy as he is science fiction, sometimes much more. He goes way back in time, too. Sometimes he's very ahead of his time. What author must I mention? Have we gone through basically everything? I could just show you some more covers now. So, I have yet to read this. This is praised by most science fiction readers. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. A collection. It's a novel, but there's a bookend plot about a collection of people telling each other stories in a broader context of being stuck together. And that whole thing is modeled after, from what I understand, Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Love the idea. Hear the book praised a lot. Have not got to it yet. So, surprised I didn't get to this guy first, but one of the most important names in science fiction, one of the ones you're going to hear discussed most often, Philip K. Dick. This was a rare find, The Crack in Space. This was before he became famous. In fact, it was the movie Blade Runner in 1982 that made him famous, and he didn't live to see his own fame. That kind of overnight fame, anyways. Blade Runner was based on a short story of his called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And this one, I have to admit, I'd never heard of before. Random find in a used bookstore. No way I'm passing that up. Some of he's almost always a challenging writer. There's a lot of subject matter revolves around paranoia and rogue technology, secret technology, and with resultant paranoia. That goes on. Overload is one of his. Is this the one I've heard described as dense? I don't know where to begin with this. I'm just going to share the title with you. Valise and Radio Free album of. I have more Philip K. Dick books, but they're boxed away because they're in poor condition. And I don't want anything else to happen to them. But it's certainly an author I must share with you and would say you almost cannot go wrong. I don't know if you can or not. I don't think so. So yeah, we kind of, somewhere in the beginning of this, we started off with a mention of Piers Anthony. Like the Robert Silverberg, this is all Piers Anthony. Almost this whole row. Up to the John Brunner, which is here. All this is Piers Anthony. I mentioned the Incarnations of Immortality series. Another series I was really into was The Apprentice Adept, which is probably a perfect example of the fact that he's equally science fiction and fantasy, because the Apprentice Adept series about two worlds that coexist. One operates on the principles of science, the other on the principles of magic. And one person finds the curtained doorway between the two, if you will. So, the first book in that series is called Split Infinity. And they are, like the incarnations of immortality, a lot of fun. So, despite what I said about the big three, Heinlein, Asimov, and Clarke, I do have a significant collection from each. Especially, you can see Asimov up here. Right there. Yeah, I've got 5 books and one he edited of a collection of short stories. Now, Isaac Asimov, thing about him, he also wrote science fact. He had his books about contemporary scientific studies, and that's about half of what I have. I'm fascinated, just as I am with the books of this time period. I am also with scientific understanding in any regard. At that time, what we knew up to that point, I would even say before the internet, just the willpower involved, the ability to research syncretically. Here's one of them. The Beginning and the End. Isaac Asimov. It's fun to hear him talk about black holes. If you look him up, interviews with him on YouTube, you get to hear him pronounce the word robot. The way he does it is robot, like R-O-B-U-T is how he says it. What is largely considered the first science fiction book. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. This is the version I recommend to everybody. For a long time, we only had the version that was from the 1830s. If you have not read the book, which is very different than the movie versions, I promise, you should read the book. Look for Frankenstein, the 1818 text. And just trust me. Despite the fact this is a relatively recent publication, I do appreciate that artwork. Then again, that happens with Penguin books. They might be the only publisher who consistently has good covers. Even if they're extremely simple, they're good. There are some others, but, we've been through most everything we need to. Here's another underrated science fiction author who was popular in his day in the 60s and 70s, who I would recommend. He's hit or miss, but mostly a hit, and unusual creative stuff. Gordon R. Dickson, Ancient My Enemy. That's the collection here is named for the first and longest story in the book. I like the others better. I liked it. I just like the others better. Maybe that is long enough. We've been doing this for a while. So I will let it go, and I want to thank you all for joining me. I will post a link to the new channel below this in the description box. And again, please know that this channel will not come to an end unless YouTube makes that decision for me. Goddess knows what they're doing, what they're thinking in terms of censorship and all the craziness they're intentionally putting themselves into and hoisting on other users without explanation, as they have done with me. But as I said in that last video, I sort of found myself in a newly motivated position for making videos, this channel and the other one. As always, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you also on the new channel. If that's not for you, but you know someone who may be interested in pre-90s speculative and science fiction readings, please point them my way. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.